Hi, my name is Ray Mallory. Been hunting feral hogs for nearly 30 years now, most of it down here in southern Mississippi. I've hunted them in swamps, bean fields, pine plantations, and every patch of muddy bottomland you can think of. Some men drink to blow off steam. I climb trees and wait for pigs. Got my first sow with a bow at 17 and never really stopped. What I'm about to share with you happened in late October 23. The pine flats behind Leaf River Wildlife Management Area had gone quiet over the previous 2 weeks. Too quiet. My usual spots weren't showing the usual patterns. Sounders were breaking up. Night movements scattered. It was like something had gotten into them. Not necessarily predators, but something had definitely unsettled them. I'd been running a bait site for nearly a month off an old logging spur. Corn, sour peaches, molasses. The cam had gone from 30 pictures a night to just one in the last 3 days. Still, I went out. Habit, mostly. My stand was an old steel ladder model, strapped between two loblolly trees about 11 feet up. Nothing fancy, just a solid angle over the clearing where the bait pile sat. I had my Ruger American .308 with a suppressed barrel, zeroed at 110 yards, and a pulsar thermal scope mounted up top. A simple, reliable setup. I carried backup too, a .357 Magnum in a chest rig. You learn to come prepared in woods like these. That night, I climbed up just before dusk, checked the wind with a squeeze bottle, and settled in. The clearing was still, a mix of pine needles, soft dirt, and old hoof prints. I sat there and waited, scanning the tree line every few seconds, then pulled the thermal scope to my eye and let it idle at low magnification. The temperature was dropping. Perfect conditions. About an hour in, I heard a twig pop. I swiveled around a bit, then found what I was looking for. A single pig. Big bastard. At least 250 pounds. Lone boar, scarred across the shoulder. Walking stiff on one leg. He moved like something had run him hard. I almost didn't believe it. Boars don't usually come out first, especially not alone. They're cagey bastards, and often wait for the sows to test the site first. But this one stepped right out. Cautious, slow, snout working the air. He moved into the open, sniffed the bait, then started chewing, tail twitching. Something didn't sit right. The woods felt too still. No frogs, no crickets, no wind. Still, I lined up the crosshairs on the boar's shoulder, but I never got to squeeze the trigger. I just finished lining up my shot and flicked the safety when underbrush behind the boar detonated, leaves and twigs blasting outward like a landmine had gone off. The boar's head jerked up, and for a nanosecond, its body froze, outlined in white heat through the pulsar. Then the thing hit it like a truck, and everything became a mess of motion and violence. It wasn't a coyote or a dog, and it sure as hell wasn't a bear. Bears don't move that fast. And they don't most certainly look like that thing. Whatever this was, it blurred as it moved, long-limbed, almost spiderish, with a humped back and a ragged pelt clinging to its spiny frame like a disease. It must have weighed 300 pounds, easy, and it hit the boar so hard that it bowled them both over in a heap of writhing, squealing flesh. The noise was wrong. A shriek, but with this wet grunt beneath, and then a hollow popping sound, like a limb being torn off by bare hands. The scope's heat signature overloaded, the colors blending, but I could see the two bodies locked together, limbs and hooves thrashing, and then the new shape on top, taller than the boar, hunched and angular as a stick bug. I froze. Slam-locked. Could hardly breathe, much less move. I'd had close calls with grizzlies, even seen a rabid dog pack take down a calf. But this was something else. The thing's movements were all wrong, bordering on erratic. It didn't bite at the boar's throat like a cat. It seemed to grab the boar by its shoulders with these freakishly long arms, pinning it hard enough to drive the thing's chest into the dirt. The boar kicked, flipping up clods of earth, but the monster just held it there, face inches from the squealing snout. In the weird grayscale of the thermal scope, its head looked too big and completely out of place, like a coyote skull stretched over a human jaw. The mouth split open to show a row of teeth I swear were as big as my pinky. The sound coming from the boar started to get thin and desperate, a terrifying symphony of squeals I'd never heard from an animal before. I think it broke at least one of the boar's hind legs in the first 3 seconds, and now it just kept pinning it, kept staring down into its face. I saw its chest rise and fall, ragged, and the curve of one clawed hand digging into the boar's rib cage. Then it started tearing, not like a wolf or cat, but with its hand, pulling fur and flesh in thick, wet strips. It shoved the snout aside and plunged its face into the wound before the poor hog was even dead. It went on for maybe a minute, maybe more, but it felt like forever. Then the boar finally went still. The killing wasn't clean. It was greedy, frantic, like the thing had been starving for a week and needed to eat the whole boar before someone else showed up to take it away. It pawed at the cavity, pulling out meat in fistfuls, then jammed its strange head and half its torso inside, the boar's ribcage breaking under the strain. I should have fired, should have done something to relieve the world of this creature, but all I could do was watch, knuckles bone white on the stock of my rifle. The longer I watched, the more the thing's horrific sight and unnatural movements disturbed me. It wasn't just the way it fed, though that was bad enough. A flurry of tearing, jerking, burying its face in gore. It was the way its whole body worked like something put together wrong, malfunctioning, asymmetric joints, limbs that moved out of sync with its core. At times it looked like it might fall apart. I watched through the thermal scope as steam poured off the dead boar, fogging my view. I dialed down the contrast and saw the creature clearly again, gray and white patches of heat radiating from its twisted body, shoulders hunched, spine slightly bending with every breath. It didn't make a sound beyond occasional wet chewing and a low, throaty grunt. The forest around it remained dead quiet, not a single nightbug, not even a breeze. Minutes passed. I still hadn't moved or made any attempt to line up a shot, still hadn't touched the trigger. The thing fed like it wasn't concerned about anything. No urgency, no sign of situational awareness, just that sick, obsessive focus. It clearly hadn't noticed me. When it reached cartilage or bone, it didn't gnaw or crunch. Instead, it used those grotesque hands to snap the ribs from their anchors and lever them out, one by one, in a parody of surgical precision. Each time I saw the pale arc of a bone flash in the thermal, my stomach lurched. I'd seen men perform field dressings with half this delicacy. It pawed at the boar, peeled back more and more hide, and leaned in until its shoulders almost disappeared into the cavity. I swallowed hard and wiped my eyes. The rifle and scope were shaking in my hands, while my mind looped in a paralyzed stutter, locked between shock, primal fear, and an irrepressible, morbid awe. This couldn't be real. Sometimes, between the heat plumes and the shifting angles, I did get glimpses of its face. It was not a snout, not really, but more of a deformed, elongated human jaw, the teeth too long and thick. The nose flayed back into a wet black triangle at the tip. Its eyes were set too wide, too flat, a bit like the boar's, but with a glassy lunar glint that reflected nothing at all. When it breathed, I saw the vapor stream sideways from its mouth and nostrils. Every so often, a stray strand of gore hung from its chin until it shook with a spasm and sent the whole mess flying. I thought of what would happen if it noticed me, if those glassy, inhuman eyes lifted and found me in the scope's reflection. Would I have the guts to shoot, or would I just lower my rifle and stare, as dumb and helpless as the boar had been? I watched the monster work, and thought of every nightmare I'd ever had, every story I'd dismissed as rural bullshit, every missing pet or mauled deer I'd ever chalked up to coyotes or bears. It watched this grotesque display for almost 15 minutes and lost count of how many times it went in, came out with a fistful of meat, and crammed it into its mouth with 2 hands. Then, I noticed something else. There was a white blur to the far left of my field of vision. Another warm shape, tall, upright, moving with an eerie calm, appeared near the brush pile at the edge of the logging spur. I blinked, thinking maybe my scope was acting up, but when I looked again, It was still there, standing completely still and watching the feeding thing with the patience I knew from years of hunting only belonged to something higher than a feral dog or coyote. The hair on my neck prickled. This one gave off a distinctly different vibe. The first was all hunger and violence, pure animal need. This new one was calmer, more calculated, like a shadow waiting for the right moment to step all the way into the world. What really made my skin crawl wasn't just that there was a second one, it was the way this new shape moved. If the first had been a grotesque mistake of nature, this one was the opposite. Somehow worse because it didn't seem to be a mistake at all. It didn't hunch or stagger or let its head loll mindlessly between bites. It walked like it had purpose. It walked like it knew what it was. Upright, coldly deliberate, not a wasted motion, not a single twitch or stutter anywhere in its silhouette. It moved through the brush like a goddamn ghost in a business suit, slowly gliding through the underbrush, every step clean and silent, every limb placed with such unerring confidence that for a moment I convinced myself I was looking at a man. But of course I wasn't. Even at a distance, even through the haze of the scope, I could see the difference in scale immediately. This one was as big as the first, and maybe broader in the shoulders, but carried itself lighter. It moved like a wolf stalking prey, careful, alert, but not desperate. I watched the shape melt between saplings, always keeping its eyes on the feeding beast in the small clearing, but never drawing attention to itself. I wondered if it was a rival, or worse, a mate. The thought of an entire pack of these things out here in the woods made my guts seize. I kept tracking the new arrival as it orbited the kill zone. Still about 30 yards away, it crouched against the trunk of an old sweet gum and waited, motionless. For a full minute, nothing happened. Even the wind seemed to die, the night locked in a breathless stalemate. I wanted to believe they would just feed and vanish, but something in me knew better. I wasn't watching random animals. This was a chess match, and I was somewhere between piece and spectator. The feeder didn't notice. It was too absorbed, too busy rooting in its kill. The second shape crept closer, every inch calculated. Through the thermal scope, I could make out parts of it in more detail now. The musculature along its arms, the shape of its head. I tuned the focus, hands sweating even in the late autumn cold, and locked onto its arm as it reached out to steady itself on a pine root. The muscles looked like they'd been poured over its bones, taut and rippling beneath the hide. Not strung out or knotted like the feeder, but smooth and tight, like a machine designed for a single purpose. The fur was different too, more uniform, shorter, bristled against the skin in a way that reminded me of military haircuts or the guard hairs on a wolf's scruff. As it paused, the animal dipped its head to study the clearing, eyes shining like patio lights in the thermal, reflecting back a double halo of white and pale blue. The more I looked, the clearer the difference became. This new arrival was a predator in every sense, but with a refinement that made it so much worse. The snout was more pronounced than the first, almost proportionate as far as wolfish features went. A pronounced, but still stunted-looking muzzle, with fur so short it showed the skin beneath. Cold, searching nostrils that flexed in tiny, deliberate twitches. But even then, something was off. A subtle bend to the bridge, a sharpness to the jaw that suggested it hadn't quite committed to either side of the species line. The mouth was a thick, black seam cut straight across the lower third of its face, set a bit too low and too wide, so that when it parted even a little, it looked more like a surgical incision than anything natural. Rows of teeth waited just behind, also proportionate and almost perfectly even. When it did open its mouth, it was only to taste the air, a half-second curl of the lips, showing just a hint of fang, and then everything slammed shut again, as if the act of exposure was something to be rationed. The effect was deeply wrong. The memory flashed in my mind of a wolf skull I'd once seen in a hunter's den, its jaws eternally gaping, but this creature's restraint hinted at conscious intent, not mindless hunger. Its eyes, too, were nothing like the big glass marbles in the other thing's face. These were smaller, set tight above the cheekbones, and they moved in a much more rational manner. Left, then right, then left again, scanning the clearing like a man would check mirrors before changing lanes. It was calculating every possibility, every angle of attack. I felt it in my own bones. This animal was not driven by need, but by a cold, methodical calculus. It stayed hidden in the underbrush at the edge of the clearing for maybe 30 seconds, just watching. Watching the one that fed like a man watching a junkie in the alley. I swept the scope back to the feeder. It had gotten sloppier, burying itself deeper into the kill. I could see its body flex, collapse, then spring as the monster pried out long tracts of intestine and gulped them down. It had no clue about the shadow 10 yards behind it. I realized, as I watched, the second one hadn't come for the boar. It was after the other monster. And for all its ugly muscle, the feeder was just as dumb as the hog it had jumped minutes earlier. Never once did it pause to check its six. Never once did it raise its head from the trough. I felt it, more than saw it. The moment the air changed, some animal dread from a million years ago prickled along every nerve. There was a pause in both their motions. The feeding thing jerked upright, blood shining wet across its face, threads of offal dangling in ropes from its jaw. It turned its head, slow and clumsy, nostrils flaring, eyes wide and empty as glass buttons. For the first time, it seemed to register that something wasn't right. But it was too late. It happened so fast I almost missed it, even with the scope at full mag. The second beast, a flash of sinew and muscle, shot out from the underbrush, now on 4 legs. The malformed one had its back turned to it when the second creature leaped. It landed on the malformed one's back with a sound I felt in my molars, not just my ears. A deep, wooden crack as the huge frame took the hit and instantly collapsed under the weight and momentum. The malformed thing went down hard, face first, plowing a furrow through the leaf rot and pine needles. The force of the impact sent both of them rolling, a writhing knot of fur, claws, and muscle. The attacker's arms were longer and thicker than a man's, but shorter than the malformed one's. Once it had the malformed one's torso cinched tight, it didn't let go. Claws embedded themselves deep into flesh, holding its prey in place. The sound the malformed thing made was so loud and so wrong I nearly dropped my rifle to cover my ears. Not a scream, not a growl, but a stuttering, high-pitched shriek, almost like a dying rabbit, only amplified and chopped up, layered with vocal cords that never belonged to anything natural. For an instant, I thought that would be it, that the malformed one would just break apart under the force, but the nightmare had tricks of its own. The upright predator held on, arms locked around the other's chest like a wrestler in a death match, while the claws on its feet raked the malformed one's legs up and down. But this thing didn't just take it. Despite its obvious pain, it fought like hell, twisting its body, long arms and claws, frantically shredding the dirt for purchase. It somehow managed to hook one back leg around and rake its attacker's calf, drawing a wet, shiny line of blood down the muscle. The upright one didn't so much as flinch. It just kept its hold, jaws snapping at the base of the malformed one's skull, missing by an inch, but only because the feeder slammed its own head backward, catching the snout with a wild backward headbutt. The malformed one used the moment of confusion to twist its torso around and slash at its attacker's face and chest with both hands. Claws spread wide. The claws raked across the upright one's skin, opening long, raw gashes that bled immediately, the flesh pulling apart in jagged layers under the force. The upright one howled finally, one short, almost human scream that turned into a gurgle. In a split second, the fight had become much more even in the sense that the upright thing was actually taking damage. The attacker let go, arms flying up in front of its face to shield its eyes against the savage clawing. The malformed beast kept lashing at it, planting a set of claws square into the upright one's snout. The upright one reeled and retreated a few steps and spun back, one hand clamped to its face, warm fluid seeping between its fingers. The malformed thing wasted no time. It scrabbled upright, balanced momentarily on all fours like a monstrous dog, then pushed up to its full, hunched height. Its breath came in savage bursts, sides heaving, arms splayed wide as if daring the other to come at it again. They began to circle each other. I could see it all through the thermal scope, both animals blazing white against the cold, black forest, steam billowing from every pore. The malformed one led with its right side, keeping the left arm tucked close to the ribs. At first, I figured it was protecting an injury, but the more the thing moved, the more apparent it became that the problem wasn't just pain, but something deeper. The arm hung at a crooked angle, hand dangling from the wrist, as if the joint had been over-tightened and stripped. Every time the upright predator circled in close, the malformed one reflexively tried to raise the limb, only for the elbow to stutter, fail to catch, and then snap back against its body. The hand flexed and unflexed in a series of erratic spasms, fingers splaying and curling like a dying spider's legs. It was the motion of a body part that did not remember how to be a body part, like a phantom limb, only still attached, but operating according to its own broken logic. The effect was grotesque, but also tragic. The malformed one fought to compensate, keeping its right side more exposed, the dominant arm extended in a menacing arc to intercept the other's approach. But the left arm never stopped twitching, the hand sometimes clawing at empty air, sometimes pawing at the ground, as if checking for a surface that might steady it. When it moved, it did so with a jerky, uncoordinated shuffle, its gait broken by the constant need to rebalance. They both started to move now, each circling the other in a tight spiral, neither wanting to commit, both hoping to scare the other off through sheer presence. They snapped their jaws in the dark, lips peeled back, froth and blood bubbling around their teeth. The attacker bared its fangs and huffed sharp, deliberate bursts of air. The malformed one answered with a throaty, ululating snarl that pulsed in time with its jittering bad arm. Neither wanted to commit. Every movement was a feint, a test, but even in that standoff, it was clear who had the upper hand. The attacker stalked with mechanical certainty, every step calculated, now and then feinting a lunge that made the malformed thing jerk back and nearly lose its stance. The damaged arm kept betraying it. After a few false starts, the malformed beast just flat-out charged, the way a wounded hog will try to break a dog's nerve by rushing straight at its teeth. The upright one was ready, bracing low, and for a moment, the two forms blurred together into a single, heaving mass of muscle and hair. I could see the impact in the way their bodies seized, every tendon pulled taut, claws and hands instantly locking around their ribs, shoulders, and heads. The next exchange was pure violence. No feints, no tests, just brute force and desperation. The malformed one lunged with its right arm and got a grip on the upright one's face, thumb and claw raking for the eye sockets. In the same instant, the upright beast drove its head forward, closing its jaws around the malformed one's left shoulder, close to the base of the neck. The upright one clamped down with brutal force. I watched its jaws work, tearing at the deltoid and upper arm like a pit bull on a rope, blood instantly pouring out in thick arterial squirts. The malformed beast shrieked in agony but never lost its grip. Instead, it doubled down, literally planting its forehead against its rival's, then raking the claws of its good hand across the upright one's brow and scalp in a frenzy. Each swipe flayed fur and flesh, exposing raw meat beneath. In the white-hot view of the scope, the upright one's face started to run with heat, first in thin lines, then in sheets, seeping into the eyes and streaming down the muzzle. Neither gave ground. They just stood there, locked together, gnawing and clawing, trading chunks of each other like they were built for nothing else. It was the most violent thing I've ever seen in my life. Both monsters dug in, every muscle fiber visible, locked in a death match. For a heartbeat, they simply stood there, jaws and claws sunk deep into each other's flesh, each refusing to yield. Then, as if by some mutual animal agreement, they both surged sideways and went down together. The upright one twisted so the malformed beast hit the dirt first, but the malformed one's good arm was already locked around its enemy's neck and wouldn't let go. They tumbled as a unit, a roiling tangle of legs, arms, and slavering jaws. The thermal scope blurred them into a single, molten shape, tangled like a spilled bowl of spaghetti, limbs impossible to separate. They rolled through the bait pile and the boar's remains, scattering corn, gore, and bone fragments. The upright one got its feet under it, but not before the malformed beast's left shoulder tore open like a zipper pop. The upright beast shook its head side to side, ripping loose a flap of skin and muscle. Then, in a move that had to be pure luck or animal genius, it let go of the shoulder and clamped its jaws around the malformed one's good hand. Not just the wrist or forearm, the hand itself right at the base of the thumb, with enough force to crush bone. The sound that came out of the malformed thing was so sharp and high it made my fillings ache. It tried to pull away, but the other had it dead to rights, teeth buried down to the gums. Even then, the malformed beast scrabbled at its attacker's face with its other damaged hand, which mostly failed but sometimes caught the upright one across the cheek or under the jaw, leaving parallel claw marks. Every impact from the malformed beast's left hand looked like it should have hurt, but the upright predator ignored it completely, all its focus on the hand locked in its mouth as it crunched down. Then, impossibly, pulled sideways, shearing the thumb and half the palm clean off. The malformed one bucked backward, pulling itself away from its attacker just long enough for the upright predator to rear up and plant both feet firmly on the ground. The malformed beast staggered, off balance, staring at its ruined right hand as if shocked by the suddenness of its own defeat. It looked up, mouth open wide in a gaping rictus, not snarling, just bewildered. It made a hollow hiccuping sound, as if it was expecting a different outcome, or maybe as if it was feeling pain for the first time and didn't know how to process it. The upright one wasn't waiting for the lesson to stick. It lunged, all calculation gone, pure wolf warlord now, and hammered the malformed beast with both arms around its waist. They crashed back together and into the dirt. The malformed one went down hard, this time backwards, and the upright predator landed on top, pinning the broken body beneath its weight. Then the beast on top snapped its head forward, jaws opening impossibly wide, and latched onto the malformed thing's throat. Not the back or the side, but the dead center, windpipe and all. The malformed thing jerked and spasmed under the attacker, every muscle bunching at once. Its left hand, the bad one, scrabbled uselessly at the dirt, then curled in on itself and started clawing at its own face, gouging lines through the blood and fur. The right hand, now missing most of the thumb and 2 fingers, slapped limply at the attacker's face. It was less a fight than a final, pitiful act of panic, like a dying man clutching at the hands that strangle him. The upright beast bore down, jaws locked, and started to shake its head side to side the way a terrier worries a rat. The malformed thing's body convulsed, legs kicking out in wild, reflexive arcs, left, right, then still. The upright predator maintained the hold, its own body covered in gouges and bloody bite marks. I watched in a kind of mortified fascination as it waited, jaws clamped, until finally the malformed beast slumped and went slack, face pressed into the dirt and shoulders heaving once, twice, then nothing. The attacker didn't let go right away, not even when the body underneath it had gone full ragdoll. It kept its jaws locked on the throat, pressing down with its bulk, every sinew flexed and bristling. I could see the heat signature of its breath, fogging out in white clouds, as if it was savoring the moment. The thing's legs straddled the dead one's hips, claws sunk into the dead meat, and for a full minute or more it just stayed like that, a wolfish silhouette holding court over its own personal hell. Something about the moment was so primal my mind almost refused to process it. Holding the slack, mangled body in its claws, the winner reared up, head thrown back, and released a torrent of urine onto the corpse below. I watched the steam rising in thick, swirling plumes from the dead rival's back, a fresh slash of heat in the thermal, like someone dumping boiling water on a snowbank. The attacker stayed like this, legs braced, chest heaving, still clutching the broken one in its jaws, while it emptied itself, marking its victory in the most ancient sense. Territory. Rank. The whole drama stripped down to biology, so pure and obvious it made me shiver. When it was done, the upright thing let its rival's head thump into the muck, jaw slack and tongue lolling. I don't know how long I sat there, just sweating and shaking with my eye glued to the thermal, but it couldn't have been more than a minute, tops, because the steam rising off the dead monster's back was still thick and rolling when I finally let myself breathe. My heart was rattling around like a trapped bat. I could taste bile and copper at the back of my throat, and that's when I effed up. I shifted my knee, just a hair, to get a better line of sight. That movement knocked the stock of my rifle into one of the stand's loose cross braces. It was nothing, not even loud, not to a human, just a dull, accidental tap. But I saw the new king of the clearing freeze, then flick its head straight up, eyes fixing on my stand, as if it knew the exact angle and height of my perch. The hairs on my arms stood up so fast, it felt like getting hit with a handful of static electricity. I tried to shrink behind the barrel, but it was a joke. The thing stared right at me, unblinking, chest heaving, blood smeared up both arms and down the insides of its thighs. Somewhere under all the adrenaline and terror, I realized I had a choice: shoot now, or sit tight and pray it decided I wasn't worth the trouble. My finger was on the trigger before I could even think about it. The crosshairs hovered between the thing's eyes, and for one frozen heartbeat, it was like we were the only two living things on Earth. My brain started to hiccup through the options. I didn't want to die in this tree, but I wanted even less to be on foot with that thing loose in the woods. The truck was nearly a mile away, and every step would break branches, snap twigs, and tell that monster exactly where I was. Putting this thing down right then and there was my only real option, so I took the shot. The monster's head snapped back, and it stumbled, staggering over the corpse of its fallen rival, before collapsing onto its side. For a split second, I thought the .308 had done its job. It looked like it had dropped cold, but then its limbs began to twitch. One arm flailed against the ground, claws scraping at the pine needles, and its legs kicked wildly as it tried to right itself. Through the thermal scope, I saw a wet spot forming just above its eyes, a splash of heat blooming from what should have been a fatal shot. I realized then I'd hit it, but the bullet must have deflected off the sloped ridge of its skull, ricocheting instead of penetrating. It was wounded, stunned, but far from dead. I kept my eye locked to the scope, heart pounding, as the thing writhed and scrambled in the dirt, desperate to get back on its feet. Desperate to finish it, I fired again and again. Each time I tried to find the center mass, but the thing wouldn't stop moving, jerking and thrashing in the dirt like a marionette with cut strings. I squeezed off at least 3 more rounds, the recoil hammering into my shoulder as I struggled to keep the crosshairs steady. I think I hit it at least twice, but in the blur of motion, I had no idea where exactly. There was no clean collapse, no sudden stillness. It just kept flailing, stubborn and relentless, refusing to die. Then, all at once, it managed to scramble to its feet, unsteady, hunched, but able to move, and scurried toward the edge of the clearing. It crashed into the underbrush, disappearing into the black tangle of pine and scrub like a wounded bear. I kept the scope trained on the movement as long as I could, watching heat signatures blur and vanish into the woods. My heart was thudding in my ears. I knew I had a window, maybe seconds, maybe minutes, while it was still on the run. That was my chance. If I waited any longer, it might recover, might circle back. I had to move, had to get out of there while I still had the upper hand. I shouldered my rifle, grabbed my bag, and started climbing down, every nerve screaming in protest. As soon as my boots hit the ground, I yanked the .357 Magnum from its chest rig and held it low and ready, the weight of it suddenly reassuring. I didn't hesitate. I broke into a run, keeping my head on a swivel, eyes cutting left and right as I bounded through the trees toward the truck. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every rustle of wind across the leaves made my spine tighten. I had no idea if the thing was coming back for me, or if there were more like it, hidden in the forest. My breath came hard and fast, not just from the exertion, but from raw panic. I kept the revolver up, finger alongside the frame, trying to move fast without losing control. All I could think was, don't stop, don't trip, don't look back. I made it out, somehow. Don't ask me how I ran that whole mile through the woods without breaking my neck or passing out from fear. But I reached the truck, slammed the door, locked it, and didn't let go of the wheel until the sun came up. I didn't sleep that night. Haven't really slept right since. I never went back. Not to that stand. Not to that part of Leaf River. Hell, I don't even hunt hogs anymore. Sold my thermal scope, packed away the .308, told myself it was age catching up, that maybe it was time to let the next generation take over the woods. But the truth is simpler than that. I'm scared. Scared of what I saw. Scared of what might still be out there. In the weeks that followed, I tried to make sense of it all. I scoured forums, watched videos, and read every piece of fringe material I could find. Cryptid reports, government cover-ups, and biological experiments gone wrong. Most of it was junk, but a few things stuck. The two creatures, whatever they were, looked a hell of a lot like what people call werewolves or dogmen. I know how that sounds. I used to laugh at those stories too. But after what I saw, I'm not laughing anymore. The first one, the one that killed the hog, looked like some failed experiment. Twisted joints, asymmetric features, as if it had been pieced together wrong. A man-made monster, maybe. Something cooked up in a lab that escaped into the wild. And if that's true, then the second one, the thing that killed it, was nature's answer. A real predator. A perfect one. The kind that doesn't need a lab because it came out of the dark, patient, and honed by time. But there's another possibility. What if I got it backwards? What if the malformed one was what happens when nature tries to evolve something new, and the second one, the killer, was artificial, built with purpose, designed to hunt? I don't know what's worse, the idea that nature made something like that on its own, or that someone out there is making them on purpose. I don't have answers. All I have are questions, and the images burned into my memory. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I barely believe it myself. But if you hunt in the woods in Mississippi, or anywhere near them, keep your head on a swivel and your guns close, because something's out there, and it's not finished. Whatever they are, they fight for dominance, survival, maybe territory. That night wasn't just a fluke. It was a glimpse behind the curtain. I don't know if they're born or built, but I know this. The forest isn't ours anymore. Not really. And if they come closer to civilization, things will get ugly.